How about you come here? How about you come here? Up. You chill here. Be pretty. Don't jump on your sister. Mona. Mona. No. No, we're not going to jump on Lisa. We're going to leave Lisa to sleep. And you may settle next to her if you want. Do you want that? Come black and white butt. Hi, hello, and welcome to my 2024 yearly palette ranking video. Today we are going to rank a total of 12 palettes as usual in an ascending order, starting from the lowest ranking to the highest ranking palette. Now, in full disclosure, using the word palettes is perhaps too strong of a word because except for Luminous Legends, which contains a decent amount of shades, meaning more than 10, all the other palettes that are included in this year's ranking are quads or quints. Apparently, I just wasn't feeling the big palettes this year. Mother didn't grace us with a mothership palette, and no other brand really excited me enough to purchase a bigger palette. There were a couple of, close ones with Natasha Denona, but in the end I resisted the urge. So literally 11 out of the 12 palettes that we're ranking this year are in a smaller format. And I think the actual palettes are also going to be a great representation of where my makeup style has been this year in terms of eyeshadow. I think I've toned down my eyeshadow looks quite a bit. I used to be someone who wears basically the rainbow, like 2016, 2017, 2018 Mariam was very much into the colorful rainbow looks, and I've slowly moved away from that, and now I'm someone who actually really enjoys like a beige brown look with a beige brown lipstick. That's really my new jam, and I am loving it. Also, another thing important to mention, I'm not actually wearing any of the palettes that I'm ranking today because I'm preparing for a series that's coming your way in January, so I filmed with an older palette. But it might be fun if you wanted to guess which palette I used. So if you wanted to take a crack at it, let me know. Which palette do you think I have on my eyes today? But anyway, you're here for the actual ranking, so let's get right into it. At position number 12, I will be ranking the Dior Quint in the shade Coral Flame. I'm going to be looking down a lot because my iPad is here and I've written down, the palettes and the order of the palettes. So if it looks strange that I'm every now and then looking down to seemingly nothing, I'm just looking at my iPad. Anyway, we're talking about this little quint from Dior. This, together with another quint that ranks a little bit higher, were released in the spring this year. And I can't really tell you, like to this day, I cannot really tell you for a fact exactly what it is that bothers me about this palette, because I do like the individual colors. If I swatch all of these eyeshadows now, I'm going to get really excited about it, and I'm going to tell you that I really like the color story because it is a beautiful cohesive color story. What I think bothers me the most about this quint is that I don't really like this Baked Gelée formula from Dior. It is a little bit too powdery for my taste. It almost looks like it's too subtle on the lids, I really love this brown shade, this like reddish brown shade, really pretty. This is a beautiful shade as well. I think my problem is more with these like lighter shades here. The light yellow is actually really pretty because it's more of a pastel yellow than it really is a gold, which is great. This shade here in the middle is a gorgeous like peachy gold flip shade, like it has a bit of a duochrome effect to it, but because of how subtle it is, it looks very meh on the lids. You see? It looks like almost nothing on my finger even. So if I swatch it, you're barely going to see anything. It is a very pretty shade, but there's just something too subtle about this quint. And I can do subtle, but too subtle is maybe pushing it a notch too far for me. It's not that I don't like it, it's not that I will not use some of the shades and pair them with other palettes to create beautiful looks. It's just that something about the formula of this in particular doesn't sit quite right with me. The quad that ranks at number 11 is probably going to come as a little bit of a surprise that it ranks so low, and I'm going to have a very hard time explaining exactly why it's ranking as number 11. But the palette that we're talking about is the one of the quads from Prada. This is the shade 03 Pulse. And here is the thing. When it comes to the formula of these Prada quads, they rank extremely high in my overall like beauty favorites this year. I absolutely love the formula of these little palettes. Now, why is this quad in particular ranking a little bit low? The reason is that I'm not too crazy. Like, I appreciate the creativity from on the side of Prada. I have an appreciation for like all the different interesting combination of colors that they present in their little quads, and I can from what I can tell, they're inspired by, you know, designs from their fashion house. Whatever, fine. But this color combination just doesn't quite work for me. The other quad that I have from them has a pop of color that, and this quad ranks a lot higher. I feel like that combination of colors and that pop of color just works more cohesively together. In my opinion, this is just not quite cohesive. The two eyeshadows that I absolutely love here are the two like brownie shades. There is like this rosy brown satin in the middle and this beautiful sparkly topper gunmetal grayish type shade. Love those. Those two are my favorite in here. The orangey shade, I don't mind it as much because it is a deeper, like less vibrant orange than what I originally imagined. I actually thought, based on the photos, this might even be a coral, which would have been even worse. It is not a coral. It is actually a really like pretty orange shade, but the one that I cannot get on board with, I just don't like this shade, is the darkest one, the one that has the maroon undertones. This shade, first of all, I do not like maroon undertones on myself, but even if we disregard the fact that I dislike the undertone of this eyeshadow, it just doesn't work for me with the rest of the eyeshadows. I don't like it with the taupe and the teal shade. I much prefer to have like a brown combined with these two shades instead of this maroon. So for me, there's just something about this color story that is not cohesive, and I don't like the colors together. And I just don't get it. I very much like these two shades, and I do pull out this quad to use these two shades specifically. Let me swatch the two eyeshadows that I actually really like in here, so that you don't get the impression that I hate the quad, because it's not that I hate the quad, I just don't really like these two shades as much. I do like these two very much. I like them together, I like them separately in looks. I enjoy going into this quad to use these two shades, but you know, it's a shame if you own such a little palette and you're really only using like 50% of it. That's a bit of a shame. So that's the reason that I'm ranking Pulse a little bit lower. At position number 10, we have our only entry from Lisa Alridge this year. I think Lisa Alridge only released one palette thus far this year, and that is her neutral, offering the eyeshadow in the color Fawn. Now, my palette Fawn underwent a little bit of a metamorphosis, as you will see, because there is a blue eyeshadow in here that is not in the original color story of this quad, but I'm too lazy to swap it out now. So the color story of Fawn actually contains another brown in the place of the blue. Let me show you the brown, because now that is housed in my Sorcery palette. So I swapped the blue in here for the brown that used to be in Fawn, and I'm much happier with these two color stories as they are than they were prior to that. So I get much more use out of the blue now that it's in this neutral context, and I finally have a brown that I was really missing in this color story. And I love the formulas of the eyeshadows that are present in here, because Lisa Alridge and Prada and a palette that I'm going to mention later from Lancme all utilize this formula that I'm really crazy about, which is this latexy, creamy, matte powder formula. Love that, because it basically is technically a powder, but it applies like a cream. It is really blurring on the skin, and I just love everything about that formula. So because of that, I love this palette. And a shade in here that truly surprised me, one that I didn't really expect I would love as much as I do, is this one here. It is a very classic, like peachy coppery gold duochrome, and I don't even think that a swatch does this eyeshadow much justice, because it is a satin type finish. It's not a very sparkly one. The really sparkly one is this white, like very light silvery, well, it's not really a silver, it's more of like a colorless white sparkle. This is a more sparklier shade, and I enjoyed using it, and I enjoy using it quite a bit as a topper. The shade Debutante really comes through when you put it on your lids. There is something so elegant and elevated about this eyeshadow that is very hard to explain unless you put it on your lids. And I just realized that besides Quads and Quints, we have one entry with 6 eyeshadows. Anyway, completely besides the point. But the reason I rank this so much lower than I think I would have otherwise is because of all that repetition of the browns. There are just too many browns in this palette that looked too similar to each other on the lids to justify being all in one curation. So it's really because of that one flaw, but a very significant flaw, that I am ranking this palette so much lower than I think it deserves. At position number 9 comes another palette that I think is going to surprise you with its low ranking, and that is one of the new quads that was released by Bobbi Brown over the summer. These are in her Luxe eyeshadow formula, so when it comes to the formula, these are chef's kiss. Stellar, fantastic, my favorite eyeshadow formula out there, because they're essentially Blitz Astro shades from Pat McGrath Labs. They're probably made in the same lab, and I believe some of them are even like spot-on one-on-one dupes for shades from Pat McGrath Labs. Now, for the most part, I find a lot of these to be like the toned down version of Pat McGrath Labs eyeshadows, in the sense that if a Pat McGrath duochrome is very strongly shifting from, I don't know, a pink to a blue, this will be a little bit more subtle. It will be more like a mauvey brown with a hint of blue. I'm talking about this eyeshadow in particular. For example, I think there is a shadow in Subliminal that is very similar to this one, but it's just a more vibrant version. So with Bobbi Brown, you're just getting the less vibrant versions of the Blitz Astro shades from Pat McGrath Labs. I think you can hear Nicola in the background playing. I'm so sorry. Anyway, why am I ranking this quad at the 9th position? A few reasons. First and foremost, I came to realize when I bought these quads, I thought there is a baked matte eyeshadow in here. Brilliant, love it, give me more. But as I've come to realize, I don't actually care for this formula at all. I don't care for this like Blitz Astral type formula in a baked matte eyeshadow, because they are somehow too soft in their pigmentation, to the point where sometimes it's really even hard to like build them up. And I far prefer the sparklier textures from these quads. So for example, this one and this one, these matte eyeshadows from these quads get a little bit lost in the mix for me, and they almost feel like wasted space, because in my head I'm like, oh, imagine if in here we actually had another like sparkly shade. That would have been fabulous. The second reason I am not a super huge fan of this, oh, I forgot to tell you what this quad is called, I'm so sorry. This is in the shade Star-Crossed, and Star-Crossed is the more like neutral, cool toned, you know, offering from the two quads that were released over the summer. The other one ranks a little bit higher. Well, quite much higher actually. The second reason that I'm not a huge fan of this specific quad is this gold here, which is also, I feel like there is a very matte base to this shade, so it doesn't really do much. So what is it doing there? I don't know. It's doing barely anything. So I don't know what to do with this shade. And then when it comes to these two shades, they're beautiful. However, actually on the eye, they look rather similar to each other, unfortunately. They're both like cooler toned pink shades. One is a duochrome, it has a bit of like that blue flip. The other one is more like a one tone, you know, mauvey pink cool toned kind of shadow. But unfortunately, on the eye, they end up looking rather similar. But you see, they're very pretty and they are not the exact same eyeshadow, but like on the eye, they don't really offer that much versatility in the, you know, tones or the colors or the effect that you're getting. So overall, I find this quad to be a little bit of a missed opportunity. There could have been so much more done with this if this shade was more of an impactful, you know, like actual flaky glittery shade, or you know, even a VR type shade, because these two are more like an astral. We could have had something that is a bit smoother in texture with like finer shimmer. It's just a texture that I don't fully understand, and like I said, I've grown to realize that these matte eyeshadows here that I was so excited about when I first bought the palettes are a little bit of a wasted space for me, because I think I would have rather had something sparkly in there. So that's the reason Star-Crossed is ranking rather low. At position number 8 we have the other Dior offering for the spring. This is in the shade Pastel Glow. Now, I like the color story of Pastel Glow a lot better, because I think it is just such a fun combination of colors. You've got this beautiful light mint green, the light lavender shade, this peachy one here, this warmer bronzy brown, and this almost like coppery red toned brown. Beautiful shades. I do very much enjoy using these two, you know, as one and done lid moments. I really enjoy these three here as inner corner highlights, because I think they look absolutely ethereal, exactly as they're meant to on the lid, with that pastel quality to them. the reason this would have ranked a lot higher if I liked the formula of these, because the same critique that I had for the Coral Flame Quad stands for this one as well. It is a baked gelée formula, but it is just not my favorite baked gelée formula. Like I said, I find it a little bit too almost powdery. I find that it doesn't really apply very well on the lid. They kind of like blend away very easily. There's just something about this specific baked gelée formula that I prefer my baked gelée formula to be more like that harder, stiffer, you know, texture, because I feel like that just applies with more impact, stays a little bit better, and it just overall performs and looks better. These are just almost there, but not quite. And because of that, Coral Flame is and because of that, Pastel Glow is ranking a little bit lower. I think this would have been a lot higher had it been a formula that I enjoy more. Let me just give you a little swatch of the three pastel shades that I like to use as inner corner highlights. So here we have the mint green, the lavender, and the little peachy one. See, they're really cute, but because of that like powderiness, and I don't know, there's something about this formula, they are, you almost can't see them. You have to pack them quite a bit. They're very pretty, they're very ethereal. I do love using them, but there is just something about this formula that misses the mark by a little bit. At position number 7, we've got my first cream color quad from Tom Ford. This is in the shade Rose Topaz. This is an absolutely fabulous palette. This is again one of those, like as the name of the quad suggests, these are a more creamy texture, and they're such a beautiful creamy texture. And I think this is a beautiful like neutral offering in terms of the color stories. You have different textures that are present in here. You have the beautiful matte shades. Actually, this one is not a matte, this has a bit of a sheen to it. The dark brown has a bit of a sheen to it. And then the metallic and that like sparkly topper shade just feels so beautiful. None of these is going to be very impactful on the lid, because that's not how they're meant to look on the lids. They are a cream formula. Cream formulas tend to look a little bit more subtle. I think that's the whole point of them. But I just think these offer such a beautiful, you know, array of neutral shades. I think you can do so much with this quad. Also, you know what, instead of swatching the eyeshadows, I'm just going to link some of the videos that I have done demonstrating these palettes, because I think the actual application can tell you so much more than the swatches. At a much more respectable position, we have my second Prada quad. This one is in the shade 05 Pure. This is how it looks like. This is much more of like a warm bronze gold with a pop of blue, and I think first of all, this curation is much more cohesive. All the colors work beautifully together. You can use just the neutral shades if you want something a little bit more toned down. You can use the pop of blue either on your lids or as a lower lash line pop if you want to. So I find this color story to be much more cohesive, and I actually like all the colors that are in here. I think this is such a beautiful gold shade, because it is not your typical like warmer toned gold. It's much more of like a neutral tone of gold, and I think it looks really pretty and elegant on the lids. This darker brown is quite of a warm toned shade, so this is definitely a palette that is clearly geared towards people who prefer their warmer toned looks, but I do love me a warmer toned brown bronzy look in the summer. And if you throw in a pop of blue, especially this particular like undertone of blue, I think this is just such a pretty, vibrant, you know, spring summer undertone of blue. And because of how creamy this formula is, it just never applies too vibrant. You can always put it as like just a hint of color. It doesn't have to be too vibrant. It doesn't have to make you feel uncomfortable. It looks really beautiful on the skin because it has a gorgeous like blurring quality to it. And I just really like the formula of these like colorful eyeshadows in the Prada Quads. They are exactly that type of like latexy creamy formula that, you know, speaks to my soul. At position number 5, we have a palette that actually came out exactly a year ago. This was a winter limited edition collection from Chanel. They released this quad and a couple of blushes, and I was very tempted by several of those blushes, and it took a lot of my self-control to not purchase any of them. But the quad I had to buy because I went to store to swatch it and I absolutely fell in love with it. And it's probably not going to come as a surprise that we're talking about Éclat de Nuit. So this is a really interesting color story in Chanel's baked formula. Chanel, just like Dior, they have like a variety of different types of formulas in their range, and this specific eyeshadow palette comes in their baked formula, which you will be able to easily recognize by the domed shape of the pans. So this is again a very neutral color story, a little bit cooler leaning. I like the combination of the colors, but really the showstopper here is this beautiful grungy, like grayish green sparkly shade. It is such an interesting, you know, eyeshadow that I tried to dupe this eyeshadow actually. I made a whole video where I tried to use a combination of different Pat McGrath Labs eyeshadows to layer them just to be able to create the effect that you get with this shade. And I wasn't really quite able to, because everything that I had just leaned a little bit to olive green, whereas this isn't really an olive green. There's like a dirty green undertone to this shade, but there's also gray. There's a bit of that like cooler toned like gold sparkle in here. There is something extremely magical and special about this eyeshadow. And I also find this color story to be quite cohesive. You can do quite a lot with it. You can go really soft, you can go really smoky, you can go really sparkly, you can completely omit the sparkle. So there's quite a bit that you can do with just these 4 eyeshadows. So cohesive color story, beautiful formula, fantastic special shade. What's not to love about Éclat de Nuit, honestly? At position number 4, we've got the most boring quint you've ever seen, but I absolutely love this little palette to bits. This is my second palette from Lancme. So this is one of their quints, which I believe have been around for a really long time. I personally discovered them last summer when I went to store and I swatched Bronze Absolute, so that is the other quint that I own in this formula. And for the longest time I've been going to store, swatching the other quints, trying to figure out which my next color story is going to be. And over the summer I finally decided that Nude Sculptural will be the next addition to my collection, because I was looking for, you know, a palette with neutral browns that is very easy to take with you when you're traveling, that is very easy to combine with like my liquid sparkle eyeshadows, with my Luxe eyeshadows from Bobbi Brown, or with the toppers from Pat McGrath Labs. Just something that gives me a variety of different neutral looks. And I absolutely love this color story. It's not even that I can get such a variety from it, but the few things that it can do, it does really well in its beautiful, stunning cream formula. So this is again in that formula that I mentioned several times, this like very creamy matte formula that just looks so incredibly flattering on the lids. You put it on and it's like a little filter on your eyelids. I love them. And the specific color story of this palette, I also think is very, very cohesive. You have this more like neutral pink over here, then you have this lighter brown, mid-tone brown, deeper brown, and this beautiful satin champagne. Like, not the most impactful shades on the planet, although this one does look quite impactful when you swatch it. I think on the lid it translates quite much more like satin and subtle. On a swatch like this it looks more impressive than it actually is on the lid. But that's also not what I bought it for or what I expect from it. I actually get a lot more use out of the matte shades in this queen than I do from this satin shade. This satin shade is either like a subtle veil on my lids or mostly used as an inner corner, and that's when I'm not doing like inner corner pops of color, because that's also something I really enjoy with this palette, to throw a neutral look and then have a inner corner pop of color, like one of the Pastel Glow shades. I've taken this traveling with me when I went to conferences earlier this year, and honestly it has proven its quality as a very, you know, brainless palette. Something that you don't have to think too hard, you don't have to worry about how your eyeshadow is going to come out, because it just basically always looks flawless. While it is a really boring palette, I absolutely love the formula and I love how pragmatic this little thing is. And now I'm curious whether you can guess what 3 palettes are left. Which 3 palettes that I've rambled about this year have you not seen in the ranking yet, and can you guess the order in which they are ranked? Now at position number 3 you're going to see a quad that is going to completely and utterly shock you. I wanted to go back to my ranking from last year just to make sure that I'm not inventing this. But indeed, so my very first encounter with the YSL Clutch Quads was not a successful one. I bought the shade Caspa Spices and I didn't really quite vibe with it. It was not my color story, it was not the combination of textures that I was looking for. I was kind of disappointed by the... this kind of made me disappointed in the whole concept of these quads, and I wasn't really super interested in them for the rest of the year. And then a couple of weeks ago I watched a video from Alicia Archer, and she convinced me to buy this palette. This is the YSL Clutch Quad in the shade Overbrun. And I know what you're thinking. Mariam, didn't you just buy this palette? How on earth are you ranking it at position number 3? Outrageous. You cannot do something like that. You cannot, you know, rank a palette that you've had for like 3 days at the top 3 of your ranking. That's just out of the question. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to rank this palette at position number 3. Is preemptively the word. The thing is, I'm rather convinced that if I had purchased this palette earlier in the year, I would have definitely ranked it really high, and that's why I am ranking it really high, because I've owned it for a short time, but it's been instant love. You know, there's been like an instant connection between me and this palette, because it is finally what I wanted from these YSL quads. This palette is absolute chef's kiss. There is nothing not to like about it. I love the undertone of this like sandy brown shade. I love this gorgeous like reddish toned brown. Absolutely in love with the tone of this beautiful like sandy bronzy gold shade, and this topper here is just makes my heart sing. It is so pretty. Unfortunately, on camera I've never been quite able to show you the blue sparkles that are present in this topper shade. And also something that's important to mention, it looks like a peachy shade, but honestly when you compare it to actual peach shades, this takes on a much more neutral undertone. So overall, I think the undertone of this palette is quite neutral, leaning like on the sandy yellowish side, with the exception of this shade, which has a stronger plummy base to it. But I just find it such a perfect combination of colors, such a beautiful combination of textures. This is finally what I wanted from YSL. I wanted eyeshadows that come in a different texture, have interesting undertones, you can create different combinations of layerings, and you can create a variety of different looks with this. You can go really, really soft if you just use, you know, some of these like lighter tones. You can go really smoky if you use the brown shade as a lid shade, and then you can apply this one as a topper. You can mix and match. You can just do so much with this palette, and I know that because of all of this potential and because of how much I instantly clicked with this palette, it was important for me to rank it high up in this list, because I knew that if I had purchased this palette earlier, it would definitely have made it here. So I thought, you know what, preemptively I'm just going to put it at position number 3 because I absolutely love it. If you, like me, found some of the quads from the YSL line to be a little bit disappointing, and you like these, you know, tones, I at the very least recommend that you go and swatch Overbrun in store, because it is such a beautiful little quad. And if you have been paying attention, you will have noticed that the other Bobbi Brown quad hadn't made an appearance yet. So yes, at the position number 2, I'm going to be ranking the Milky Way quad that was also released in the summer together with the shade Starcrossed. This is a gorgeous color story. It is actually very surprising because it's quite like a pink-centered color story, and I'm not usually someone who enjoys pink, but I do love these shades. I do love the textures, I do love the undertones, I love everything about this. Again, I will say this. By me, we could have substituted the matte eyeshadow with another, you know, sparkly shade, because again, you can barely even see it. I will say this though, I don't mind pulling out other palettes to pair with these like sparkly shades, so for me it's not a problem if I have to pull out multiple palettes to create the look that I like. But if you're someone who just wants to work with one palette at a time and you really need a matte eyeshadow to, you know, ground your look, then I can see why she puts these matte eyeshadows in these quads, because some people just really do need them. So I don't mind this shade. It's not one that I use a lot or at all, if I'm being honest, but these other 3 shades are just chef's kiss. I love them so much. The shade Lunar, in fact, ranked as this one here, ranked as one of my top 2024 makeup favorites. Like, this specific eyeshadow is stunning. The shade that is over here, the shade Incandescent, is essentially a dupe for VR Nectar from Pat McGrath Labs, and I love this one here. This is the Pink Gold Duo. That is like a more toned down version of the Bliss or VR shade that is present in Divine Rose 1. If you have Divine Rose 1, you know exactly which shade I'm talking about. So this is the one from Milky Way. It is again just the less vibrant, less colorful version of Pat McGrath eyeshadow. This shade here, a straight up due for VR Nectar from the Sublime palette, and the shade Lunar, which has the absolute most beautiful, like, ethereal pink sparkle to it. I do think this is a beautiful palette. I've gotten a lot of use out of it since I got it. I've traveled with it, and something that I forgot to mention is how beautifully luxurious the outer packaging of these Bobbi Brown quads is. These are not cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but you truly are paying for what you're getting. You're getting a high-end, high-quality formula in truly luxurious outer packaging. And the rightful queen this year, at position number 1, we've got the Luminous Legends Mega Palette from Pat McGrath Labs that was released for Holidays 2024. I know a lot of people had a lot to say about this release, and I think a lot of people are comparing this palette to motherships because we didn't get a mothership this year. We did only get this palette as like the big palette release of the year for Pat McGrath Labs, but I think it's completely unfair to put this on the same scale as a mothership palette. They are in different tiers. They are completely different categories of products, so you cannot put them together. I think you need to look at this palette for what it is. And I personally think this is one of the best palettes that has been released this year that I personally have tried. And yes, I totally agree with you. It is almost unfair to be comparing a 15 pan eyeshadow palette to quads and quints. It's almost as if, you know, you're comparing apples and oranges, but this is the only big palette that I purchased this year, so I either had to include it or I had to discard it from the ranking. So if we just stick to the quads and quints that I purchased this year, then it was really Milky Way that we would consider my number 1, and I think if I had owned Overbrun longer, it would probably have been a tie, or Overbrun would have been at the top. But as it is, I do have Luminous Legends, and it is a palette that I have truly enjoyed so very much, and I personally don't really see too many flaws with it. Again, people may have their opinions, but I look at this palette for what it is. And what this palette has to offer is really not insignificant. You can do, in terms of like the types of looks that you can do neutral looks, you can do cooler looks, you can do warmer looks, you can do smoky looks, you can do very daytime looks. So the palette offers you a lot of versatility, and it offers that versatility to you in a formula that I personally really enjoy. So if you are not familiar with this formula, this is a formula that she introduced 2 or 3 years ago when she first introduced her quints. So the little 5-pan palettes, the mattes in those palettes are again very similar to that creamy matte formula. They're very smooth on the lid, really beautiful. There are 3 of them in here. And the metallic eyeshadows that come in this formula are like molten metals. They are so incredibly stunning and impactful on the lid. So this is the shade Lunar Luxury, and I mean, Lunar Luxury is just absolutely stunning. Look at the reflectivity of this shade. There are just truly some very special shades in here. I really love this shade, this shade, this shade, oh, this one as well. Honestly, I could swatch like most of this palette and tell you that I love it because I truly do enjoy a lot of these shades so much. It's also very funny because when you compare these, like the level of pigmentation, intensity and reflectivity of these to all of these like quints and quads that we talked about so far, it is indeed comparing apples and oranges. I'm sorry, but there was really no other way to do this because I did purchase this palette and I did want to include it in this ranking, and it is my favorite palette that I have bought this year. I just think Luminous Legends has a lot to offer and it doesn't really deserve a lot of the criticism that it has gotten. I think at this point, there is so much criticism for Pat McGrath Labs, the brand, and Pat McGrath, you know, as the creative director or not creative director, who knows anymore, of the brand, that people are completely blinded and biased towards all of her releases, and it's always like everyone goes in with a little bit of negativity. Oh, she didn't give us this, she didn't give us that, she didn't, you know, give us a mothership. I get all of that, it's fine, but I feel like you should also like objectively look at the product that you're being presented with, and objectively speaking, I think this is a really great palette. Personally, I enjoyed a lot. You can see I've created a lot of content with it on my channel. I did like a whole week of it. I have a full-on review if you're interested. So personally, I would say it is my favorite palette that I have purchased this year, even if we didn't get a mothership. Hopefully next year. So with this we can conclude my 2024 yearly ranking video. I think a couple of things that I would like to reflect upon in retrospect is, first of all, I'm very glad that I purchased less palettes this past year than I did the year before. I went back to check, and in 2023 I ranked 18 eyeshadow palettes, and my journey towards exploring these like smaller curation of palettes had already started. But you can definitely tell that this year I went very much in the direction of like smaller curations, quads, quints. Luminous Legends was the only big palette that I purchased, and I think there are several reasons for that. Maybe I wasn't inspired by any of the bigger palettes, maybe I'm a little bit tired of bigger palettes, and it maybe reflects a little bit of like a change in the way I like to do my makeup these days. I like to pull a couple of these, smaller palettes and combine them and layer them together. The way I apply my makeup has changed a little bit this year, and that is very much reflected in the types of palettes that I purchased. So yeah, I think this was an interesting trip down memory lane, and like an interesting perspective on where my tastes have been this past year. I'm very curious what your taste has been this year. How many palettes did you purchase? What is your top 3? What did you think about my ranking? Were there some surprises? Were there some shockers? Were you all shocked that Luminous Legends occupied the first place, or did you see that one coming? Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!